Max Verstappen addresses the post-Bahrain discussion between Helmut Marko and his manager, Raymond Vermeulen, whilst his future is, once again, a leading talking point on Media Day ahead of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Elsewhere, Lando Norris revealed he needed a reset after his issues in Sakir. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined by a very well lit up lead editor, Ian Parks. Ian, that is not a bad backdrop, of course. What's the time currently, local time in Jeddah? What's your time?
9:15 in the evening. So at this point on Sunday, we'll be 75 minutes into the race. Temperature is actually really lovely. We saw, just very briefly, Nick, just to digress a second, we saw at about 2 in the afternoon, the air temperature was 29 degrees, relatively pleasant. Track temperature, 61.
Wow.
So get a load of that for first practice, because that's kind of like what they're going to be experiencing. And but yes, as I say, evening times a hell of a lot different. Really pleasant temperature right now, so should be a good Jeddah Grand Prix. We've always loved the Saudi Arabian race here. It's always lent itself to drama, excitement. I'm not anticipating that it will be any different on Sunday.
Well, look at your backdrop. It's once again, it's my favourite F1 updates of the season in Jeddah because the backdrops are always so cool. You seem to always find a brilliant spot. However, we've got to address this straight away. From those who have watched these F1 updates since the very beginning, going back to the start of last season, you all know by now that my favourite backdrop of Ian's across his travels was last season's post-race F1 update in Jeddah. And you had behind you, I think the best way to refer to it was a bit of a carpet shack. It was just absolutely loads of Saudi Arabian rugs. You have upset me, Ian, because you have revealed that shack, that little hut, is no longer there.
It's not today. That's not to say that it might make an appearance at some point over the weekend. For this
Cancelled.
evening, where that Bedouin tent effectively was last year, they've set up a media barbecue. So I've just enjoyed some beautiful meat, it has to be said. Very wonderfully cooked in its spices. Anyway, let's move on, Nick, to the actual spicy stuff
Yes.
from this weekend. And I'm going to have to be careful not to move my hands this evening because I've noticed that shadow creeps across my face when I do. So I'll be quite careful on that one.
Yes, let's get straight into it. Of course, Max Verstappen was in one of the two driver press conferences today. And whenever Max is in a press conference, you know it's going to be the Max show because pretty much the other two drivers don't get a question because everybody wants to ask Max what's going on in the life of Red Bull. Of course, the big discussion coming out of Bahrain was this heated exchange seemingly seen by Sky Sports' Ted Kravitz regarding Max's manager, Raymond Vermeulen, and Red Bull's motorsport advisor, Helmut Marko. Max was asked about that exchange by yours truly. Great job as always, Ian. And his response was interesting, it's fair to say.
It was a very good response. He said that it was effective. Now, let's just row back just a second,
Yeah.
because the way Ted Kravitz described it was that Raymond Vermeulen, Max's manager, was remonstrating with Helmut Marko, and that Helmut Marko was pretty much just standing there and taking every word that Raymond Vermeulen was throwing at him. And that Raymond effectively then, at the end of this exchange, stormed off out the back of the garage. Now, since then, Ted has refused to row back on anything that he saw and indicated as well that the reason why Raymond was remonstrating with Marko was because of the issues that Red Bull had with its pit stops during the course of the Bahrain Grand Prix. As we now know, there was a wiring loom failure in the traffic light system. That's the system that tells the drivers that the car is ready to go, they can pull off, and that's why we've seen Red Bull pull off some of the fastest pit stops in history, often around 2 seconds. On this occasion in Bahrain, both Max and his teammate Yuki Tsunoda suffered with the traffic light system. It led to delays in their getaways. It led to them losing places on track. Now, if that's to be the case, this is why, as I say, Raymond was, as I say, forcibly making his point to Helmut Marko. Now, Max's response when I asked him about this as to could he shed any light on why this took place, and was that exchange reminiscent of the overall feeling within the Verstappen camp as to the way things were going inside Red Bull. Well, Max's response was basically, well, we're allowed to have conversations with the top brass at Red Bull. Obviously, in this occasion, Helmut Marko. Max added that Christian Horner came in and joined in that conversation. Now, whether Ted didn't see that or not, but Ted certainly didn't mention Christian Horner. It was simply an exchange between Raymond and Helmut. And as I say, Raymond storming off afterwards. And the key point that Max made was when conversations, and in whatever form they may take place, whether they're heated or otherwise, conversations, it's because people care about what is happening on track. They care about what's happening in the car. They care about what is happening with the team. So I thought that was a very good point, well made, that naturally everybody wants, within Red Bull, of course, everybody wants the team to do well. Everybody wants the drivers to do well. And of course, within the Verstappen camp, everybody wants Max to do well and go on to win what would be a record equaling 5th successive driver's title that would, of course, match the feat of Michael Schumacher during his Ferrari heyday. It's about caring, about wanting the team to ensure it's delivering the best car possible, but also ensuring that its systems, when the car isn't quite at its optimum, those systems are delivering the optimum for its drivers. In this case, if it was to do with the traffic light system, that of course is quite unusual for Red Bull to have such a failure on the back of the car performing not as well. And of course, we saw that's why it led to Max finishing a relatively lowly 6th position for him in that Grand Prix on Sunday.
And of course, the Jeddah Corniche circuit, excuse my voice, don't quite know what's going on, but the Jeddah Corniche circuit is a venue which has worked so well for Red Bull since it was introduced, and Max in particular almost produced, of course, one of the best qualifying laps of all time in 2021 against Lewis Hamilton. But Red Bull are pushing on so hard to try and improve this RB21. Quite clearly, a troublesome car for both Max, Yuki Tsunoda, was obviously the same case for Liam Lawson as well, but it's introducing upgrades this weekend, changes to the underfloor's aerodynamics, something you won't see in person unless the car is lifted up following an accident, thinking back to Sergio Perez in Monaco a couple of years ago. But Red Bull are really going for this. They want to get on top of the issues with the RB21. And as I said, more upgrades this weekend.
Yeah, this is obviously the first real showing of Red Bull's fans when it comes to its update. We've been waiting for this to come online throughout the course of the season. We knew it was coming. It was always going to be in the pipeline, of course. As you mentioned, Nick, it's going to be more what you can't see, unfortunately, for the fans out there. Yes, of course, we know what the shape of the bodywork looks like, and we know various changes are made to front wings, rear wings, side pods, etc. This, as you pointed out, is more about what's underneath the car, what's affecting the crucial aerodynamics that take place within those key areas. And we know the floor is an extremely crucial area on these cars ever since these rules were introduced at the start of 2022, of course. Now, we're led to believe that this particular introduction of this package is the first of 3. We're probably going to see something more in Miami, and then we're going to see the conclusion of the overall package at the following race in Imola a couple of weeks afterwards. We will then get a really good, solid indication as to where Red Bull will be in the current pecking order. Will it have made the gains it is hoping for to thrust itself back into contention in the Constructors' Championship? And naturally, and probably the priority at this stage, bearing in mind they've not quite had that second car in the fight for that Constructors' Championship, is can it push Max Verstappen forward into a more considered battle for podiums, wins, and potentially that 5th Drivers' Championship, as I've mentioned.
One driver who there are a lot of eyes on going into this weekend is, of course, Lando Norris. He had a difficult weekend in Bahrain, still leads the championship, but only just. Oscar Piastri, clearly the real driver in form. And what's interesting is Lando today in Jeddah discussed the fact that he needed a reset after what happened in Bahrain and actually could have done with a few more days off.
Yeah, again, do I dare say it? That was in response to the first question that I asked him in that media session.
You're on fire, mate. What's going on?
Do my best to give you fans what you like to hear from these drivers. So, yes, as you say, you've got to think back to Saturday in Bahrain, post qualifying. Lando pretty much on the floor with his performance, really abject the way he felt. He said then that more than likely he needed a reset. Well, yes, we know what happened on in the race. At least he came through to third position. Could have been more. He felt, of course, he managed to challenge George Russell over the closing few laps, was unable to get past George, of course, as we know, had to settle for third position, but did actually increase his lead in the Drivers' Championship from 1 point over Max Verstappen going into the weekend to 3 points over his McLaren teammate Oscar Piastri coming out of it. So not a bad weekend for George. So during that reset that we've had over these past couple of days, from leaving Bahrain and coming to Jeddah, Lando has come into this weekend with a slightly more glass half full approach. And he's actually decided to say to himself, well, do you know what? The start that I've had is actually something that I could only really have dreamed of coming into the season. So at least we've seen more of a positive mindset from Lando coming into this weekend than perhaps might ordinarily have been the case when he came out of it. So he's recognizing within himself that actually there are a lot of positives to this season, even if he is still bemoaning the fact that, and again, he mentioned it this evening as well during his media session, that he is continuing to struggle with the car. He's not quite sure why he's struggling with that car compared to the way he felt with it coming out of last season, when he knew if you'd have asked him, and this was how he phrased it, if you'd have asked him at the end of last season going into a qualifying session, are you confident of delivering a good qualifying performance? He would have automatically turned around and said, yeah, actually, I feel really good with the car. However, if you ask him now, are you confident of a good qualifying performance? He's going to be a little bit more hesitant because he's not quite sure what he will be able to get out of the car and his feeling with it going into that qualifying session. As we saw in Bahrain in particular, it was a little mistake into turn one, not quite getting the most out of the car coming out of turn two. And it is these little details which Lando knows he has to work on if he is to ultimately extract an overall weekend performance out of the car, not just a good qualifying lap here, a good qualifying lap there, but then letting himself down on maybe another qualifying lap that ensures that he doesn't quite get that grid slot that he knows he needs to be challenging, in particular, as we're looking at right now, his teammate Oscar. And we're led to believe that Red Bull should perform better here. And of course, we've known, or can see, sorry, that Mercedes has been going well, of course, in particular with George Russell at the wheel of the W15.
And George Russell summed it up really well in that if one McLaren driver isn't firing on all cylinders, then odds on the other one is. And that's what we've seen this season so far. When it's not being Lando on top, it's been Oscar, of course, Max being the sole exception in Suzuka. But Oscar is something we've discussed a lot. It's just such a different character to Lando. He's just so calm, so relaxed, kind of taking everything in his stride this season. And actually, he addressed that today and discussed the fact why he is so relaxed, why he is so calm, and why that's the approach he chooses to take.
Yeah, he was asked as well, have you ever become emotional inside the cockpit of a car? And he said, yeah, on a couple of occasions I have. Not that we've seen it yet,
Yeah.
obviously, in Formula One to, a greater or lesser extent. But it's just the way he feels he needs to go about his racing. He needs to maintain that calm approach. He needs to be level-headed. Um, but in many respects, he is the polar opposite of Lando when you consider the way they are as characters and as personalities. Lando, as we've quite obviously come to see now, he wears his heart on his sleeve. He says it like it is. He doesn't mind expressing his feelings, laying it out there on the line, um, for us to gain a real insight into him as a person. And he says, just to go back to Lando's media session, he said that 95% of the time, he feels when he does that, it's a good thing. The remaining 5%, he does appreciate that when he says those things, there's then the knock-on effect that it actually then gets back inside his head and he starts then to overthink things and analyze things to a greater degree. Whereas Oscar, as I've just mentioned, is far more considered. He's not prepared to go into that level of detail as to how he's feeling or what he's thinking, which is understandable. If every driver has their different approach, and the driver will go about a way of expressing themselves that they feel is beneficial to them. And within the McLaren camp, we have one driver who is calm, who is level-headed, who doesn't give too much away, and the other driver, I'm not saying isn't calm or level-headed, but nevertheless, he, as I say, goes the extra mile into allowing us into his world as to what he is thinking and feeling.
One driver who also is known for showing their emotions throughout their entire career and wearing the heart on the sleeve a little bit is Lewis Hamilton. And of course, it's not been the start to his Ferrari career that he would have wanted, that the media really expected as well. And he was asked a very interesting question today in regard to, does he feel that people are just trying to make a crisis out of everything and anything happening at Ferrari, something which he openly agrees with.
He said yes straight away, because Ferrari is that kind of team. There are,
Yeah.
as he put it, headlines created around that team more often than not from not very much. Headlines are conjured for clicks, as he put it. So yes, he feels that as he has become already accustomed to and has noticed over these first 3 months since he joined the team, that Ferrari is a team around whom there is considerable focus, considerable attention, probably more so than what he likely experienced during his time at Mercedes. That's just the way it is. Ferrari has this fan base, this following, this allure for many people that might not be a Ferrari fan. As I say, Ferrari has this mystique around it, this magnetism, and naturally people are drawn towards it. And from that, you get this focus and then this presentation following on from that of certain content. And of course, that's what we are looking at most particularly since Lewis Hamilton has joined this team, simply because of who he is, what he has achieved throughout his career as a 7-time world champion and as a driver with more than 100 Grand Prix and more than 100 pole positions to his name. So yes, the spotlight has been very, very glaring on both Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari so far this season, and Lewis is now fully appreciative of that and why that is.
Just finally, I want to discuss my favourite line of today, and it kind of all stems from a quote that came out from former F1 driver Ralf Schumacher ahead of this Grand Prix, in that Max Verstappen, could go to one of 4 teams: Mercedes, McLaren, Aston Martin, and Alpine. Obviously, they've got Flavio Briatore, somebody who could probably sign any driver he wanted. They've also got a Mercedes power unit from when the new regs come in next year. The question was put to Pierre Gasly: does Alpine have the things in place to maybe attract the likes of Max Verstappen? And Pierre very much reiterated something he has said earlier this season as well, that he's very, very confident about Alpine's chances next season, to the point that he believes he can be world champion next year.
Yeah, as you say, he reiterated a comment that he made during a press conference at the F1 75 launch at the O2 Arena in mid-February, basically on the lines of, if Alpine gets all its ducks lined up in a row, then why not? Why could he not become a world champion next season? Because, as we stated many times in our updates and our podcasts, who knows which team is going to be flying out of the blocks next season. Now, one of the ways I'm looking into Ralf Schumacher's comment, why he's thrown Alpine into that equation as to a team that Max Verstappen could eventually join, should that be possibly the case. We know, and a comment has emerged out of a press briefing that the one of the Saudi princes gave, who's the head of Saudi Arabian motorsport in this country, that Saudi Arabia could potentially acquire a team not too far down the line. Well, there are rumors in the background that one of the reasons, of course, why Flavio Briatore was brought into Alpine was to raise its profile, to ensure it became, at some point in the not too distant future, a more saleable asset. Now, that saleable asset, who knows? Could it be sold to Saudi Arabia in whatever form that might be? We know, of course, its PIF organization owns Newcastle United, the team in the Premier League football in England. Now, with that amount of money behind it, should Alpine be bought by PIF, by Saudi Arabia, they could throw the absolute bank at Max Verstappen to lure him to Alpine at some point. This is just me speculating, folks. This is not me saying what's going to happen. It's just conjecture. It's just me trying to ascertain why Ralf Schumacher would throw Alpine's name into the equation alongside, as you've mentioned, Nick, Aston Martin, McLaren, and
Mercedes,
of course. So it was a strange one, Alpine. So I'm just hypothesizing here, shall we say, and just trying to understand why Ralph said what he said, because, of course, he didn't actually back up that particular comment with any substance. So I'm trying to add that degree of substance. And who knows? It would then become a question for Max Verstappen as to what would be the best option. Would he prefer to go to a team that he knows is going to win? And you would assume McLaren in its current guise and what it has achieved with its technical department over these past nearly coming up now 2 years in particular, given what Mercedes has achieved when it encountered a new set of power unit regulations back in 2014 and the way it dominated the sport, would he prefer to go to a team that he would almost be assured of winning at? And maybe he might have to take a pay cut compared to what he's earning at Red Bull right now? Or would he prefer to go to a team, i.e. Alpine? And yes, he might have the ultimate breaking the bank salary, but maybe it might not be that winning machine that you feel McLaren and Mercedes could produce. Who knows? Maybe Alpine could come flying out the blocks in 2026 and deliver that car that Pierre Gasly certainly thinks could make him a world champion. It's a wide open space that we can only speculate upon, and that's what we're doing right now, because that's what Formula One is about. Sometimes we have all these stories, we speculate upon them, and obviously we see what comes out as the end result.
I think it's the perfect conversation to throw across to our fans. Let us know in the comment section below where you think would be the best fit for Max Verstappen if he were in the future to leave Red Bull. Who knows? As Ian said, anything can seemingly happen in Formula One. Ian, amazing stuff. As always, love in the background once again. Be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join us post-practice Friday for the latest F1 update. See you later.
Take care until then, folks. Thanks for watching and listening.